We were sitting in the living room of the house I bought for her. Not for us, let's not kid ourselves, for her. At the time, it felt like the kind of thing a good husband did. I'd spent months working extra hours, cutting corners on things I actually cared about just so we could afford this place. The big windows, the open floor plan, the little reading nook she always said she wanted, all of it. The backyard that she swore she'd turn into a garden. The upgraded kitchen she insisted on, even though I did most of the cooking. It was supposed to be her dream house. And back then, if she was happy, I thought I was too. Now we were just two people sitting in a room full of things that didn't mean anything anymore. It had been building for a while. You know how some people talk about falling out of love? That slow unraveling? For us, it was more like rot, hidden beneath the floorboards, spreading in silence until one day the whole place smelled like something had died and you realized it was your marriage. Jenna had this way of making every conversation feel like a courtroom cross-examination. It didn't matter what it was, I forgot to take out the trash, or I didn't say good morning fast enough. Everything became a referendum on my value as a husband, as a man. She didn't scream. That would have been easier, honestly. No, she used precision, words like scalpels, slicing just enough to hurt, never enough to leave a scar you could show someone. That night felt no different. At first, she was picking apart something I'd said earlier in the week. I don't even remember what it was. Probably didn't say, thank you, for something, or maybe I said it with the wrong tone. That was a favorite of hers. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Like she could read motives from syllables. I sat there, sinking into the couch cushions, letting her voice wash over me like background noise. It wasn't that I didn't care. I cared too much, for too long. But something in me had just stopped responding. Like my soul's emergency brakes finally kicked in. Then came the line. The one that cracked it all open. If you're gonna keep arguing, she said, voice cool and deliberate, forget about intimacy. She said it like she was offering a business ultimatum. No raised voice, no drama. Just cold, calculated leverage. Like I was supposed to panic. Like I was supposed to grovel. I remember looking at her, really looking. Her jaw was tight. Eyes narrowed just slightly. She was watching me like a chess player who thought she'd just locked in the win. And then I smiled. It wasn't smug. It wasn't sarcastic. It was the kind of smile that comes when you suddenly realize you don't have to play the game anymore. When something snaps and you feel lighter, freer, even if you don't know where the hell you're headed next. Forget it forever, I said. Plain. Honest. Her whole face stiffened. She blinked, just once, then didn't move. I could see the thought forming in her head, the what did he just say? Panic, the he's bluffing calculation. But I didn't waver. That moment? That was the most honest I'd been in years. I stood up, smooth and slow like my body knew this was an important exit. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything or slam the door. I didn't need to. There's a kind of power in silence, in stillness. And for once, I held it. I turned off the lamp in the corner. She hated when I left it on. Then I walked out of the living room and headed to the shed out back. It used to be hers, storage for seasonal decor, throw pillows, boxes labeled fall vibes, and holiday magic. But somewhere along the line, I started clearing it out. First a corner for my tools. Then a bench. Eventually, a small space heater and a chair. I didn't call it mine. I didn't have to. It just became the only place in the house where I could hear myself think. That night, it felt like sanctuary. I closed the shed door gently behind me, letting the soft click settle. It was cold, and the heater took a few minutes to kick in, but I didn't mind. I sat down on the old camp chair, leaned my head back against the wall, and just let myself breathe. Not the kind of breath you take when you're trying not to lose your temper. Not the kind you take when you're trying to survive another lecture. This was different. This was the breath of a man who realized he didn't owe anyone another explanation. I sat there in the dark, just me and the low hum of the heater. And for the first time in a long damn time, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. I didn't miss her. I didn't wonder if she'd come out and find me. I didn't care what she was doing, sitting there in that too-big house we'd built around her preferences. What I felt, and I remember this vividly, was peace. Not the kind you read about in self-help books or see on Instagram quote cards. I mean real, bone-deep peace. The kind that sneaks in after you finally let go of the fantasy that someone's going to change. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop trying. And that night I stopped. The next morning, I woke up in the shed with a stiff neck and the quiet warmth of the space heater buzzing in the corner. There was frost on the window, catching the early sun like dusted glass, but I felt good. Not happy, not excited, but settled, grounded, like I had finally stopped clawing through fog and found solid ground under my feet. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching from the cold air and the hard chair, but it didn't bother me. It was the kind of ache that reminded you you're still alive. I opened the shed door and stepped outside, the grass crunching beneath my boots. The house looked different in the morning light. Not physically, but emotionally. It wasn't mine anymore. I mean, technically it was my name on the mortgage, my money in the foundation, my sweat in every painted wall. But emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it, it belonged to a version of me I wasn't anymore. A guy who bent until he forgot how to stand. Jenna was in the kitchen when I walked in. She looked up from her phone, and I caught the exact moment she realized I hadn't come back inside the night before. Her mouth parted slightly, like she was about to say something, but nothing came out. She just watched me, waiting. I didn't say a word. I went straight to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, just one, and leaned against the counter like it was any other morning. I didn't ask her if she wanted any. I didn't ask how she slept. I didn't ask anything. She watched me for a minute, arms folded, clearly trying to figure out what this new version of me was. Usually, after one of her cold shutdowns, I'd go into apology mode. I'd try to fix whatever it was I didn't know I'd broken. That's how the pattern always went. She'd dangle affection like a reward, and I'd perform for it like a trained dog. But not this time. I pulled a pan from the cupboard, cracked a few eggs into it, threw in some bacon. The smell filled the kitchen. Comfort food, my kind of morning. She lingered at the table, clearly expecting me to slide a plate across to her like I always did. I didn't. I made one plate, sat down alone, ate alone. "You're quiet," she finally said. I nodded, took another bite, didn't even look up from the plate. "You stayed in the shed all night?" I shrugged. "Yeah." "You mad at me or something?" Her voice had that familiar edge. Not concern, not apology. Just irritation masked as curiosity. Like my silence was an inconvenience. "No," I said, calm as ever. "Just tired." She scoffed quietly. "Of what?" And there it was. The opening. The invitation to have the same damn fight for the 100th time. But I wasn't going to take it. Not anymore. I finished my coffee, stood up, rinsed my plate, and left it in the sink. I didn't answer her question. I didn't owe her that. Not today. The rest of the day I kept to myself. I took the truck into town, drove with the windows down even though it was freezing. I just needed air. I stopped by a hardware store, picked up some sandpaper and oil to fix an old wooden bench I'd been meaning to refinish. Jenna hated that bench. Said it looked like trash. But I'd always liked it. My grandfather built it. When I got home, she was on the phone in the living room, speaking in a tone that suggested she wanted me to know she was frustrated, that passive-aggressive pitch she used when she wanted to signal that I was being difficult without saying it outright. I walked right past her. Didn't ask who she was talking to. Didn't ask how her day was. Went back out to the shed, set up my little workbench, and started sanding. Hours passed. I didn't notice. My hands were covered in dust, my ears buzzing from the quiet. That kind of silence is addictive. It's the opposite of the tension that used to fill our house like smoke, invisible but choking. Out there, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself for existing. Later, I came in to shower. The house smelled like pasta, one of the few things she liked to cook. She had set 2 plates at the table. I walked right past it, grabbed a towel, headed upstairs. The smell of shampoo and old regrets filled the bathroom as I let the water wash off the sawdust and grime. When I came back down, the food was cold. She was sitting at the table still, waiting. Her eyes flicked to me, searching for something. Recognition, maybe. Submission? I don't know. I made dinner, she said. I saw. Aren't you going to eat? Not hungry. It was a lie. I was starving. But I'd spent years swallowing things I didn't want to, pretending to be fine. Tonight, I didn't feel like pretending. She pushed back from the table hard, the chair legs screeching across the floor. What is your problem? She snapped. I turned to her, drying my hands with the towel. You said if I argued with you again, I could forget about being close to you. So I'm not arguing. Her mouth opened, then closed. No rebuttal. No comeback. I dropped the towel on the counter and walked back out to the shed. It wasn't about punishing her. I wasn't trying to manipulate or guilt trip her. This wasn't some tactical move. I was just done playing her game. And honestly, watching her sit at that table alone, staring at the place where I used to fold, that felt like the first honest moment we'd had in years. Out in the shed, the heater hummed again. I poured myself a finger of bourbon, leaned back in the chair, and looked up at the exposed beams above me. And I thought, not for the first time, maybe this place was never supposed to be a home. Maybe it was just a stop on the road to finding myself again. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first night I actually started. The days started bleeding together after that. Not in the usual monotonous way that married life sometimes does, but in this quiet, shifting way where things looked the same on the surface, but nothing underneath matched anymore. I'd wake up early, before the sun, and slip out to the shed without a sound. Sometimes I ran first, laps around the neighborhood, breath fogging in the cold morning air, heart pounding like a reminder that I was still in here somewhere, still alive beneath the dull weight of a life I no longer recognized. Other mornings I'd just sit in silence, sipping coffee while the world woke up around me. Jenna noticed, of course. She's not stupid. For years, she counted on the rhythm of our life, the way I'd circle back to her no matter how far I drifted emotionally. She could throw the harsh words, the subtle digs, the long icy stretches, and I'd always come crawling back, desperate to fix things, to make us okay. That version of me was gone now, and the silence I carried with me was louder than any fight we'd ever had. At first, she played it cool. Pretended not to notice when I stopped asking where she was going, stopped texting when she stayed out late. I'd come home some evenings to find her on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pausing just long enough to glance at me with that expectant look. The one that said, "You're supposed to ask." But I never did. I'd nod, maybe say, "Evening," and keep walking. The funny thing was how freeing it felt, not in a spiteful way, not some bitter, "I'll show her" mindset. Just free. Like I'd stopped auditioning for a role I never wanted in the first place. The good husband. The peacemaker. The one who tries. I wasn't trying anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared more about myself than about preserving something that was already broken. Conversations became shorter, more transactional. "I'm heading out. When will you be back?" "Later." No details. No explanations. She used to demand them. Used to act like knowing my every move was her right, not a privilege. Now, when she asked, I'd just smile a little, say, "I'll be around," and that was that. It drove her crazy. She started trying new tactics, baiting me into arguments, picking at little things. "Why are your boots muddy? You didn't refill the Brita again. Can you please stop leaving your jacket on the banister?" The same old game, hoping I'd rise to the challenge and snap. But I didn't. I'd just nod, shrug, maybe offer a quiet, "Sure," or "I'll get to it." Nothing to grip, nothing to push against. She didn't know how to fight with someone who'd stopped playing. Eventually, she shifted strategies. One morning, I came down after a run to find her standing in the kitchen in one of the old sweaters I used to love on her. Hair brushed, makeup light, soft smile. She looked good, no denying that. And I think she expected that look to pull something out of me. But it didn't. "You want breakfast?" she asked, already reaching for eggs and a skillet. "No thanks," I said, opening the fridge and pulling out a protein shake. "Got what I need." She hesitated. "You sure?" I nodded. "I'm good." Her face twitched for half a second, barely visible, but I caught it. She hated that I didn't need her, hated that she couldn't read me anymore. The thing was, I wasn't trying to be unreadable. I just wasn't playing by her script. I was showing up as me, and she didn't know what to do with that. I started going to the gym in the next town over. Not because I needed the distance, but because I liked it there. The people didn't know me. I could walk in, do my work, nod to a few regulars, and leave without anyone asking how my marriage was going or what Jenna thought about this new phase of mine. I didn't need to be explained or justified. I just was. After a few weeks, I started running longer routes, cutting across the trail near the lake. That place became sacred to me, still, quiet, untouched by whatever storm was brewing back home. I'd stop sometimes and just sit on a bench, watching the water move, listening to the birds, letting the cold air settle in my chest like a reset button. I came back one evening soaked from a sudden downpour, clothes clinging to me, shoes caked in mud. Jenna was sitting on the stairs when I walked in. I half expected her to launch into a lecture about the mess or demand to know where I'd been. Instead, she just looked at me for a long second. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. You been different lately?" I shrugged. "I guess I have." There was a long pause. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like she didn't know what question to ask. Or maybe she was afraid of the answer. "I just miss how things used to be," she said quietly. I met her eyes then, and there was something raw in her face, not sadness exactly, but confusion. Like she was finally realizing she'd lost something, and not just control. She'd lost me. I didn't say, "I miss it too." I didn't say, "We'll figure it out." I just nodded again and walked past her, heading up the stairs. Later that night, I heard her moving around downstairs, opening and closing drawers, fussing with something in the kitchen. When I came down the next morning, the table was set. Pancakes, bacon, even that damn French press she used to complain about me using. There was a note: "Thought you might want a real breakfast." I looked at the spread for a minute, then poured myself some coffee, grabbed a banana, and headed out the door. I didn't touch the rest. It wasn't about punishing her. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. Pretending was what got us here. And I think, deep down, she was starting to understand that. I don't remember exactly when I decided to change how I looked. There wasn't some big moment where I stood in front of the mirror and declared, "It's time." It just started happening. Quietly, almost unconsciously. I think it was the first morning I opened my closet and realized I hated everything inside it. Half the stuff in there wasn't even me. It was her taste. The button-up she said made me look more put together, the sweater she picked out during some sale I barely remembered, the beige-on-beige crap that made me feel like a character in someone else's story. So I tossed it all. Bagged it up and dropped it at the donation bin down by the gas station. I didn't tell her. She didn't ask. If she noticed her curated version of me disappearing one hanger at a time, she never said a word. I bought jeans that actually fit. Boots that didn't feel like they belonged to someone trying too hard to be safe. A leather jacket. Real leather, the kind that breaks in with wear and tells its own story. Got my hair cut by someone who didn't work out of a strip mall. For the first time in years, I looked like me. Not the version I'd molded to make her happy. Just me. And people noticed. It started with a woman at the coffee shop near the gym, older than me, sharp eyes, soft smile. She said she liked my jacket. That I had a presence. I didn't flirt back. Didn't even think about it. I just said thank you, and that was enough. It was weird how powerful that felt, not because someone noticed me, but because I didn't shrink from it. I wasn't invisible anymore, not even to myself. I started going back to the auto club a couple towns over. Years ago, I used to spend weekends there with a few buddies, wrenching on old bikes and half-dead trucks, swapping stories and grease-stained jokes over cheap beer and busted knuckles. Jenna hated it. Thought it was a waste of time. Said the place smelled like oil and failure. So I stopped going. Like I stopped doing a lot of things. Quiet sacrifices I made for the sake of peace. But now, I went back. The place hadn't changed much. Still the same dented toolbox by the door, same faded posters on the wall, same guys arguing about carburetors like it was a life or death situation. And they welcomed me back like no time had passed. Like I hadn't disappeared into a life I didn't recognize. There was this calm that settled over me when I was there. I'd get lost under the hood of some beat-up Harley, hands black with grease, classic rock humming through the busted speakers, and for those few hours, I wasn't a husband or a disappointment or whatever Jenna had spent years convincing me I was. I was just a guy who loved engines and silence and the feeling of doing something that didn't need justifying. One night, after a long ride out to nowhere in particular, I found myself walking into this tiny cafe in Chicago. The kind of place that plays jazz too low and serves coffee way too strong. Jenna had always turned her nose up at places like that. Said they were hipster garbage, said I was trying too hard, if I even suggested going. But I'd always wanted to try it. So I did. I found a seat by the window, ordered a black coffee, and just sat there, watching the world go by. And that's when I met Laura. She sat down one table over, red scarf, reading a book I'd read years ago but hadn't thought about in forever. We didn't flirt. Not even a hint of it. She noticed the title of the book I'd brought with me and asked what I thought of the author. That's how it started. Just a conversation. About books. Then music. Then travel, and why people keep ending up in lives they never actually chose. We talked for almost 2 hours. No rush, no agenda, no tension. Just two people being real with each other. I didn't mention Jenna. I didn't mention the marriage or the shed or the silence I was living in. I didn't want to bleed my story onto someone else. And Laura didn't press. She didn't try to read between the lines or ask loaded questions. She just talked and listened and laughed in this way that felt effortless. When it was time to go, she smiled and said, "Maybe I'll see you around." Not a promise. Not a suggestion. Just a maybe. And that was perfect. I drove home that night thinking about how strange it was to feel seen without having to explain yourself. How rare. Not because of some romantic spark, but because it reminded me of what life could be when it wasn't wrapped in tension and guilt and emotional ledgers. When I got home, Jenna was on the couch. She looked up as I walked in. Her eyes did that scan they always did now. Checking me for changes. Trying to read something on my face. "You were gone a while," she said. I nodded, kicking off my boots. "Went for a ride." "With who?" "No one." "You always come back this late?" I poured a glass of water, ignored the jab in her voice. "Only when I'm enjoying myself." She didn't respond. Just looked down at her phone like it held the answers she was looking for. Maybe it did. Maybe she was texting someone, asking if this version of me was dangerous. Unpredictable. But the truth is, I wasn't dangerous. I was just no longer manageable. And for someone like her, that's probably worse. She didn't say goodnight. I didn't either. I headed upstairs to the room that used to be ours, but now was just mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wonder if she'd follow. It started happening in small ways. The shift. The unraveling. I noticed it in the way Jenna lingered by the shed when I came back from my morning runs, or how she'd accidentally show up in the garage while I was working on the old motorcycle. She'd ask if I needed gloves, a towel, water. She hadn't offered me anything in years, not without an edge, not without it being transactional. Now her offers came soft, hesitant. Like she didn't know what I'd say. Like she didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe she didn't. She started sitting closer on the couch, claiming she just wanted to watch whatever I had on, even though she never liked my movies. She'd cook dinners she used to mock, light candles she hadn't touched in months. Once, I came home to find the fire pit lit in the backyard, her wrapped in a blanket with 2 mugs waiting. I walked past her, said I had work to do. I didn't. I just couldn't sit next to her and pretend I hadn't spent years being starved of this exact kind of effort. Then, one night, she brushed her fingers down my arm while I was reading. So familiar. Like muscle memory. I didn't pull away. I didn't react at all. Just stood, walked upstairs to the room she no longer entered. I think that was the moment it hit her. Not like a slap, but like the slow drip of cold water down the back of your neck. That I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just wasn't coming back. A week later, she cracked. I was buttoning up a new shirt, clean, fitted, something I'd bought for myself, when she stepped into the doorway of the bedroom. She looked tired. Not physically, but in her posture. Like someone who'd been holding up the roof and finally realized the walls were caving in anyway. "Are you seeing someone?" she asked. I turned to her. Didn't flinch. Didn't lie. No. Then who is she? There is no one, I said. There's just not you. The silence that followed was so thick I felt it in my chest. She sat down on the edge of the bed like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. I don't want to fight anymore, she whispered. This isn't a fight, I said, buttoning my cuff. This is me walking away from one. Her voice cracked. I thought we were just going through a rough patch. We've been in a rough patch for years, I said, steady. You just liked it better when I kept pretending it wasn't. Then I did something I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times but never actually thought I'd do. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the number I'd saved a month ago, and hit call. Jenna watched, confused, until I spoke. Hiya. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I said. Divorce? Yes. Jenna didn't cry then. She just sat there, quiet, still, like she was waiting for the next line in a scene that had been rewritten without her. The days after that were chaos. She oscillated between ice and fire, begging, blaming, reminiscing, lashing out. One night she left the house and didn't come back until dawn. Another, she tried to sit next to me like nothing had happened, making up stories about old memories. I let her talk. I didn't say much. I think that hurt more than anything else. The realization that I had nothing left to say. I moved out 2 weeks later. Found a little workshop by the lake with a studio apartment on the 2nd floor. It was small, but the kind of small that made you breathe easier. The air there was quiet, honest. Mornings smelled like fog and engine oil. Evenings tasted like freedom and ash from a cheap cigar I didn't have to hide. I started riding again. Fixed up the old bike that had been rusting in the garage, rode it to nowhere just to feel the hum of it in my bones. Laughed again. Real laughter. Not the nervous kind you let out to keep the peace, but the kind that shakes something loose inside you. Jenna stopped texting eventually. Word got around that she wasn't doing well. I didn't follow up. I didn't ask. She had her shot. I gave her years of my life, pieces of myself I'm still gathering back, and all she did was measure me against her disappointments. I don't hate her. That's the thing. People think freedom comes from hatred, from burning it all down. But it doesn't. Freedom is walking out the front door and not looking back. It's standing in the middle of your own life and finally recognizing it. She doesn't own any part of me anymore. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I belong to myself.